Thank you for joining me for this Lifeway study of the book of First Peter. Our lesson is number 10. It's First Peter 5, verses 1 through 11. The title is Be Humble. And our lesson summary statement is believers are called to display a spirit of humility with each other and God. On the board, I'm going to have written for the class as they're coming in so that I can begin to move their mind in the direction of the lesson. Two questions. The first question is why I wouldn't want to be a preacher. And then the second question is why I would want to be a preacher. And I intend to have some fun with that. But I'd like to know why they wouldn't want to be a preacher. And I'm sure there are a number of things they could say. The 24/7 on call, nearly every weekend schedule, maybe living in the fishbowl, that kind of thing. Why would I want to be a preacher? Well, one of the most interesting things is when they do occupational studies, the most satisfied group with their occupation are ministers. Another thing is the people you work with. You don't have some of the other things that happen out in the secular field of work. So anyway, we'll talk through that. But these two questions illustrate the twin themes that are all the way through the book of First Peter, and that's the theme of suffering and reward. Peter he's addressing people who are suffering for their faith. We talked about the fact that they were experiencing a fiery ordeal, and yet Peter keeps bringing back the fact that this time is limited and there is going to be a reward for those who are faithful in their suffering before the Lord. Now, most of the letter deals with a Christian's response when he is faced with opposition and persecution for their faith. And this creates pressure and stress. And the ones who are most likely to feel that at first are the leaders of the church. They're going to be the targets of persecution. And so they're called to set an example of humility and response when it comes to suffering. And humility is pictured by Peter as the secret to living the Christian life and dealing with suffering and having victory during these times. So what is humility? Well, the word literally means to level a hill or a mountain. To level a hill or a mountain. In other words, humility is cutting yourself down to size until you're not looking down on anyone. No protruding arrogance or ego. Humility is the greatest secret and the most difficult decision when it comes to living the Christian life. At no point does Christianity come into conflict and disagreement with this world more than on this subject of humility, because Christianity makes it a paramount virtue. The world despises humility. It's not a prominent virtue in other religions, not in Confucianism or Buddhism. It's not one of the 5 pillars of Islam. In fact, our world really follows more the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, who emphasized power, and the Superman, who was tough and brash and not dependent on anyone. And yet, in contrast to that, you have Jesus, who calls us to be childlike in our trust and our dependence and our humility upon God. The great Christian Augustine said, "For one to know the ways of God, you must first humble yourself. Secondly, you must humble yourself. And third, you must humble yourself." And so this is a very powerful lesson, a very important lesson for Christians in living in response to a world that is opposed to us, but also the oil that smooths the relationships that are happening in our churches and puts us in a position where we can grow and live a life of victory with Jesus Christ. Now, one other thing I might do with this lesson is to go explore the Bible. Tells about what many believe is the best baseball player in the world, and that is, I have a difficulty saying, is Shohei Ohtani. and he plays for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He's a pitcher and a hitter. His first year that he came into the National Baseball League, he was Rookie of the Year in 2018. And in 7 years, he's won the Most Valuable Player 3 seasons. Last year, he was Most Valuable Player, and he was a significant part of the Los Angeles Dodgers winning the World Season. but but there was a video taken of him that has now gone viral, and the article tells you how you can find it. It's just a minute or so. And what he does without prompting and no one noticing is he pours water for the players that are out on the field so that when they come in, they already have water available to them. And that caught the attention of people because so many times in professional sports, we don't see acts of humility. In fact, they had to make a rule against dancing, I guess, in college football because of the showing off after scoring a touchdown. But here is a man who is showing service, and people speak about his humility. You may want to also use that, or just simply use that for your introduction to go explore the Bible. Well, the first point is pastors. 4 pastors, chapter 5, verses 1 to 4. And as I mentioned, the first place that suffering is typically going to come to a church is to the pastors. And so it's important that they set a proper example. So I want to read the text. I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, as well as one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. Shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but willingly as God would have you, not out of greed for money, but eagerly, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples of the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Now, Peter refers to himself in a threefold way in verse 1. And I want to ask the class to look at verse 1 and describe what are the 3 ways that Peter describes himself. One of the ways he describes himself is a witness to the sufferings of Christ. Now, a witness is someone who has seen something, and it's someone who also may tell something. And so he is saying that what he has seen and what he has shared are about the sufferings of Christ. He knows about the sufferings of Christ in Gethsemane. He knows about the beatings that took place, the trials that he faced. He was there at that. And though we don't have any evidence of him being at the cross, maybe in the far distance he was at the cross, but he certainly witnessed the testimonies of Christ, so the sufferings of Christ. So he is a witness of Christ. The second thing he says, he is a one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. The word shares is koinonia. It's a word that says things we share in common. And just like they're going to experience the fullness of their salvation in glory, Peter says that's part of my experience too. And then a third thing, he says he's an elder among you. The word elder in the Old Testament referred to the leaders of the tribes and the clans. And when the synagogue system came along, it referred to the people who were the administrators, not necessarily the teachers of the scripture, but the people who saw that everything was maintained in good order and organization. And these people became people to be respected and admired, to be emulated. Now, here's 3 things Peter says about himself. Now, what's interesting is all of those things, of course, are true. But look at the humility of this man. This is an apostle of Jesus Christ. This is one of the leading apostles of the Lord Jesus Christ. He doesn't introduce himself that way. When he's talking to the pastors, he uses words that identify with them. And then when he speaks to them, you'll see in verse 1, he said, I exhort the elders among you. He could have commanded, but he's not commanding, he's encouraging. And so what you see in verse 1, is an example of the humility that he is going to be commending for the pastors and for the church members to follow after. Now, when you come to verse 2, what you have in verse 2, well, before I get to that, I just want to ask the class, what is a shepherd's job? And then we could talk about that. A shepherd feeds the flock, protects the flocks, cares for the flock. What is an overseer's job? Well, an overseer is, of course, managing something that belongs to other people, and his purpose is to see that those things are used to the greatest benefit for that of the owner. It says that he is an elder. What's the contribution of an elder? Well, in this point, it's to be an example. And those words found here describe the job of the pastor. Now, I want to talk about the motives that he gives. That's in verse 2. And in essence, this is what he's saying. A pastor should be someone who doesn't have to do it, but he wants to do it. There's a big difference between coerced when you suffer, and it's something you want to do and you suffer for it. And here are these men, they're going to be put in a very difficult situation. And they should not be coerced to do this. They should have a desire, a willingness to do this, because it'll make all the difference in their attitude towards it, whether they're going to be bitter or whether they're still going to have a spirit of joy. I have a friend that sent me a text the other day, and he said that the average age of pastors today is 60. That's surprising that it's that age. But he said that the younger generation, the Gen Z generation, is not wanting to enter the pastorate. And the reason they suspect why these men in that group are not entering the pastorate in enough numbers is because of the toxic environment of churches. I wrote back to my friend and I said, well, I'm sure our generation is responsible for churches having that kind of toxic environment, where we should have had enough courage to confront Christians and say, you're not supposed to behave this way and you need to repent. And I'm sure my generation bears some fault in not confronting unchristian behavior in our churches, not confronting the pride and arrogance that sometimes is found in our churches. But I said to my friend, what are they going to do about this passage in chapter 5? Who do they think they're pastoring? These are sinners. And this is just part of what's going to happen in this world. And if they think they're looking for a wonderful environment where everybody's getting along, well, welcome to the real world. So anyway, a pastor, it's not, he doesn't have to, but he wants to. That's the motivation here. A second thing, he doesn't do it for the dollars, but he does it for delight. There's an article that I found in a website called Ministry Watch, and it's about a couple, a pastor and his wife, who sold a piece of property that belonged to the church for $300,000 for their own benefit. It's just stunning to me. But it's not uncommon for you to hear on some kind of a regular basis somebody in church who has stolen or embezzled funds. But we also live in a day in which the wealth and health gospel preachers live such enormous, lavish lifestyles that even the world, when they look at it, says, I'm not certain this is right. And so a pastor needs to be paid. The scriptures speak to that. He doesn't need to be kept poor. He needs to be well cared for. But he doesn't do it for the dollars. He does it for the delight. President Wilson's father was a Presbyterian minister. He had a beautiful horse and carriage, And one day, some members saw his horse. He was caring for it. It's beautiful. The carriage was in good shape, but he looked a bit shabby. And so the members said something to him about the contrast in appearance. And President Wilson's father, the Presbyterian minister, said, "Well, I take care of my horse and carriage, and the church takes care of me." So churches ought not to be stingy with their pastors. He describes the motives: not have to, but want to; not for dollars, but delight. And then he describes the right manner in which he's supposed to pastor. That's in verse 3, where he talks about not lording over those entrusted to you. His authority is to be used to serve the church, not advance his own interests. His power with people comes from an exemplary life, not some kind of dictatorial authoritarianism. That's where he gains the authority to influence people. There's a picture. If you take a triangle and turn it upside down, the top, the wide part at the top, the point at the bottom, that's really a picture of Christian leadership. That's leadership pyramid. For what the triangle illustrates is that as you move further down in leadership in the church, it becomes more narrow. There are more demands made of you. There are greater expectations placed on you. If up at the top, if you're an attending member, you have some expectations, but they're not as great as someone who's maybe a Sunday school teacher, or someone who's a deacon, someone who's staff, and someone who's a pastor. And so that leadership pyramid says that in the Christian faith, in leadership, as it goes down towards the greater leaders with more responsibility, there is a narrowing, there is higher expectations placed on them. And also, it also conveys that as you go down, your service to the church goes up. This leadership pyramid, it's faced in the church, it's facing this way instead of the other way. Now, why in the world would anyone do this? Well, he says in verse 4, there is a reward. When the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. The word unfading is based on a flower they have in that day that never seems to fade. When it was put into water, it would revive. And so it's the idea of an eternal crown of glory. Crown has the idea of honor and victory. And of course, the glory is has to do with the beauty and the presence of the Lord. And so he says this is not all there is. President Wilson's father is one day going to receive, if he was a faithful man of God, the unfading crown of glory. One other thing I want to point out about this passage that is important for pastors to keep in mind. In verse 3, it says, not lording over those. Now notice this, entrusted to you. Now that means they're not yours. They belong to the chief shepherd. And amazingly, God has called people to help shepherd his people. So it always is helpful for a minister to remember these are God's people that he has been entrusted with. The second point deals with the lay people. So you're not left out of this call to humility. The second point is for believers. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 through 7. Again, I'd read through the text, and this time I might add a little more details to it. He says, in the same way, that is, in the way that pastors are called to live in selfless service to God's people, you are called to live in selfless service. You who are younger, and there are all kinds of suggestions about what it is. Good scholars say, well, he's talking about young people have a tendency to maybe resistant to authority. It could be referring to young converts. I don't know there's any way for us to tell, but he is calling these people to be subject to their elders. And notice he says next, all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another. So he's talking to the whole members. The word clothe is an interesting word. It means to tie the knot. And it was used to describe the apron that a slave would wear when they were working and waiting on the family. And so it's clothing that distinguishes them as a servant. And you can go into a restaurant and in just a matter of a moment, you can pick out who the servers are. And oftentimes it's because of their clothing. And so he is saying to these that every member, not just pastors, but every member is to clothe themselves. Isn't that interesting? They're to put on the awareness, the actions of a servant. He says, because God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. That's the motivation. He's quoting a passage out of Proverbs there. And the motivation is why you should humble yourself is because the one who opposes you, who stands against you, is none other than God himself. But for the one who humbles himself, the goodness of God is poured out upon that individual. So verse 6, humble yourselves. This is a command. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time. In God's time, not necessarily our time. So there are under the mighty hand of God. There are three basic expressions of where you see the mighty hand of God taking place. One is creation. The second is the redemption out of Exodus with Moses and the Israelites. And the third is the resurrection. And so if this God has that kind of power, well, then there is nothing that opposes him, and it would be foolish to oppose him. And if you'll humble yourself to him, this God has the power, the wisdom, and the goodness at the right time to exalt you, to lift you up, to reward you, to recognize you, whatever the need might be there. And then he says, not only are you to humble yourselves, but one of the expressions of humbling yourself is by casting all your cares on him, because he cares for you. Now, there's a number of examples he could have used to illustrate pride, but isn't it interesting that the one he uses to illustrate pride is worry? Because worry is saying, I'm not certain that God is aware of this, or God can do something about this, or that I can trust God with this. And yet Peter is saying that if you're a person who is worrying, and the word care here, the first care means your mind's divided. You're not fully trusting God. He said it's an issue of pride. And why should we believe God and humble ourselves? Because he cares. It's a different word, that word care. It means a concern. And the thing he keeps pointing to is that when we're worrying, we need to remind ourselves that we have a God who cares for us. And if we have any questions about that, when we're suffering, we just simply need to look at the cross. Now, to get at the lesson, to make it applicable, here are some things that I thought about doing in terms of taking this text. Now, you may not want to use this because this is a secular song, and you have to be selective in secular songs. But in 1974, Mac Davis sang a song, "Oh Lord, It's Hard to Be Humble." And I was going to read the first couple of verses of that song, and and again, I think it'd just be fun because it's a fun, humorous poke at himself. But what would it be like if you had a member like this in your church? Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. That's the theme of the song. And so I want to use a humorous way to get into a serious topic. What's it like? I mean, and I might even give them some examples to prompt it. What's this person going to do if our leadership comes to us and says, we actually need your room for another class? The other class is growing so fast and rapidly that they need this space. And so we need your room, and we need you to move to another. How would this person respond to that? What about this issue of talking about other church members. How would this person respond in that situation? What if the church makes a decision about how to spend some money and this person disagrees with it? How's their actions going to be? You see, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take the class to say these have real world issues here when he's talking about these Christians and the fact that they need to humble themselves. So what does Peter say to a prideful church member? And I just want him to go back through this text. Look at this text. A prideful church member who is divisive or obstinate or who's arrogant or who gets angry because they don't get their way. I'd like for that church member to know what Peter has to say to him. And so I just want to look at it. He says you're to be subject to the elders. He says you're to clothe yourselves with humility. He says you are to resist, that God will resist this person. How you like to have God in opposition to you. But if you'll humble yourself, God gives grace. He pours out his goodness and his benevolence upon these people. He tells these people, you need to humble yourselves. And if you'll humble yourself, he will exalt you, and he'll do it at the proper time. Now, I'm wanting them to see that kind of thing. And then an example of humbling is this issue of not worrying. And I want to deal with them and ask them, how is worrying a sign of a pride problem? I would imagine most worrywarts don't really see that as an issue of pride. But Peter does. Peter says, worrywarts, what's going on is an issue of pride. And one of the things that needs to happen is they need to learn how to apply humility to those situations. So explain that to me, class. Now, after we've had a discussion on those things, I just simply want to summarize. It takes humility to put others first. Putting others first reveals that we trust God and that he has the power to do what is right. Therefore, we repent of any sign of pride and we love and serve others. This will involve both soft love, where you just overlook someone's offendingness. And then it also has hard love. Brother, you can't treat people like that. You can't speak to people like that. And you go and speak to people in gentleness to get them to correct their ways. This is what the humble will do. They will know how to love soft, and they will know how to love hard. When you suffer, your response to God is important. That's what we're learning here. But when you suffer, your response is not only important to God, it's important to the devil. And so in the last point, there is a warning. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 through 11. Again, I want to go through and explain some of these verses as I read through them. Barna did a study in 2002, and he said in 2002, 95% of Americans believe in God. 41% don't, but 41% believe in the devil. Now, if you are an enemy and you can convince the one that you're opposing that you don't even exist, you have won. And more than half of Americans, 60% nearly, don't even believe in the devil. Well, Peter believes in the devil, and he has a warning for Christians. What's the devil doing to defeat you according to this text? That's what I'm wanting them to see in this. And it has things like he's roaring. A lion's roar can be heard 5 miles on the plains. 5 miles. Within 200 yards, it's 100 decibels, which is equivalent to a rock concert. There's no creature on earth that makes a louder noise than a lion's roar. Can you imagine how that must make your blood go cold when you're within the distance of a lion? And so he says this is a prowling lion. That is, he's calculating and stalking and picking what's the most vulnerable parts of your life. And then he roars in order to defeat you. And so I just want to go through the class and say, what's the devil? And most likely it's demons doing to defeat you according to the text. Then I want to talk, give them the figures that are found in the Bible of the devil. The devil is pictured as a lion and a serpent, an angel of light. His word means adversary and it means accuser. So here's the way he comes at us. First of all, he will be a bully. He will be overt and powerful and persecuting. Like a lion, he will attack. If that doesn't succeed, then he comes like a serpent, and that is with deception and hiddenness. And if that doesn't work, then he comes like an angel of light, portraying that he is the truth, but the truth is he is a deceiver, and he is your adversary, and he is an accuser. The devil hates your guts. He will not make a peace treaty with you. He will not stop trying to destroy your Christian witness. Understand something. You can say, if the devil will leave me alone, I'll leave him alone. Here's the problem. He will not leave you alone. He hates you, and he wants to destroy you. And every Christian needs to get that settled in their mind, that he is real and he is out to destroy us, and he needs to live and come against him in a way in which the scriptures describe. One of the things that I would ask the class to do is, Peter's writing these descriptions. The Bible writes these descriptions in ways that fit that day and time. What would be some modern day descriptions if they happen to be working today that would describe the work of the devil? One of the things, just to push out, just to give them something to think about, is a spider web. You know, the insects get caught in that unaware, but it is to their death. Another might be Hollywood mockery, how they make movies that are opposing to what we believe. And then the list of a Christian's response to Satan. I want to talk about that's in that text. Now, to close the lesson, I'm going to give them this a sheet of paper, and it has 3 actions to follow through on this lesson. Here's the first one. Meet another's need anonymously, just as a way to practice humility. Meet another's need anonymously. That may be to send them some money for someone in need of that. It could be just to send them a note that praises them and speaks admiringly about them. Could be doing that with a gift. It could be simply, without anybody knowing, that you deliberately and consistently and regularly pray for someone for this coming week. Secondly, make a list of things you're complaining about. Is it because of pride or worry? What is it that you're complaining about? Repent and resist. And then last of all, just deliberately choose to serve someone this week. Just to act out our humility. Believers are called to display a spirit of humility with each other and with God. Listen, brothers and sisters, if we can get this into the hearts of our church members, our churches will become places of love and peace and joy. If you have a pastor that's joyfully serving the congregation because of the calling of God on his life, you're going to have joyful people in that church as well. And so pray for your pastor, pray for him, and then pray for your memberships as well. God bless you. Thank you for being a part of this Bible study.